The police cruiser's lights painted my driveway red and blue as Officer Martinez stepped out, his hand resting on his belt. Karen stood on her porch across the street, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk spreading across her face like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. "That's her, officer," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air, pointing directly at me with an accusatory finger. "The one who's been breaking every single rule in this neighborhood. The troublemaker who thinks she's above our community standards." I stood there in my nurse's scrubs, still exhausted from a 12-hour shift at County General Hospital, my feet aching and my mind foggy with fatigue, wondering how painting my front door the wrong shade of blue had somehow escalated into a criminal matter requiring police intervention. My name is Sarah Chun, and I'm a registered nurse working in the intensive care unit at County General Hospital, where I've been employed for the past 8 years. I bought my house in Riverside Meadows 3 years ago, back in 2020, thinking I'd finally found the perfect place to build my life and maybe eventually start a family. The neighborhood was absolutely beautiful, with tree-lined streets that turned golden in autumn, well-maintained homes that ranged from traditional colonials to modern ranch styles, and friendly neighbors who actually waved when you drove past. It seemed to promise exactly the kind of stable, peaceful existence I'd been craving after years of living in cramped, noisy apartments near the hospital where sirens wailed at all hours, and my neighbors' arguments kept me awake at night. The monthly HOA fee of $175 seemed more than reasonable, considering everything we received for that investment. The community boasted a sparkling pool with a proper lap lane for serious swimmers, not just a shallow kiddie pool like some neighborhoods. The common areas were professionally landscaped with different seasonal flowers that bloomed from spring through fall, creating beautiful displays of color that changed with each season. Streets and sidewalks received regular maintenance, never developing those dangerous cracks and potholes that plagued other neighborhoods I'd lived in. There was even a well-maintained playground with modern equipment for families with children, though I didn't have kids yet myself. What I didn't know during those initial house showings, what the cheerful real estate agent had conveniently failed to mention despite showing me the property 3 separate times, was that Karen Witt, my neighbor living directly across the street in a house that looked like it came straight from a magazine cover, had appointed herself the unofficial enforcer and guardian of every HOA rule, regulation, and her own extremely personal interpretations of what made a proper neighborhood. She watched our street like a hawk watches a field full of mice, her living room window serving as her personal surveillance station, complete with expensive binoculars that she didn't even bother to hide when you caught her watching you. It started small, as these situations often do, before they spiral completely out of control. The first week after I moved in, still surrounded by half-unpacked cardboard boxers, and trying to figure out where my grandmother's antique dresser would fit best in my new bedroom, Karen knocked on my door carrying a clipboard and wearing a tight smile that didn't quite reach her cold blue eyes. She was in her early 50s, with short blonde hair styled in that particular helmet-like way that never seemed to move, even in strong wind, as if she'd shellacked it into permanent submission every single morning with industrial-strength hairspray. She wore a crisp white polo shirt, tucked neatly into pressed khaki spotless white tennis shoes that looked like they'd never touched actual grass or dirt, and carried herself with the bearing of someone who took their self-appointed authority extremely seriously. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she announced, with false cheerfulness, though her tone suggested this was more of an official inspection than a friendly greeting, the way a health inspector might welcome a restaurant owner before citing them for numerous code violations they'd discovered. "I'm Karen Whitmore, and I make it my personal mission to help new residents understand our community standards and expectations. I've lived in Riverside Meadows for 18 years, so I know absolutely every rule inside and out, probably better than the board members themselves who wrote them." I invited her inside, genuinely thinking this was normal neighborly behavior, and perhaps even helpful for someone new to HOA living like myself. I'd never lived in a homeowners association community before, always renting apartments where the only rules involved paying rent on time and not disturbing neighbors. After 10 at night, having someone explain the ins and outs of HOA life seemed like a genuine blessing, a shortcut to avoiding problems down the road. For 45 minutes, She walked through my house, pointing out concerns. My mailbox was 2 inches too tall. My house numbers needed to be exactly 4 inches, not 3 3/4. The mulch should be dark brown, not reddish cedar. My doormat was too large. My porch light was the wrong shade of white. The list continued. My house numbers were mounted an inch too high. The decorative flag holder violated some rule. Even my welcome mats design violated aesthetic standards. She documented everything on her clipboard. These are all clearly outlined in the HOA guidelines, she declared with absolute certainty, tapping her clipboard for emphasis with each point she made. I've made detailed notes of every single violation I've observed today. You'll definitely want to fix these within 30 days to avoid escalating fines and potential legal action. The HOA takes compliance very seriously here in Riverside Meadows. And, as a new resident, you'll want to make a good first impression with the board and established homeowners. I thanked her politely, but thought she was being overly particular. I'd read all 47 pages of HOA documents when buying the house. While detailed, they weren't as specific as Karen claimed. There was nothing about doormat sizes, porch light shades, or mulch colors. 2 weeks later, I received my first HOA violation notice in a white envelope. It was for mailbox height. The fine was $50 within 14 days, escalating to $100 weekly. The notice included measurements, referenced Section 3.7, and warned about non-compliance. I measured again, using 3 tapes. 43 inches, exactly. The HOA documents specified 40 to 45 inches. I was in perfect compliance. I gathered photos from multiple angles, measurements with a level, and copies of relevant handbook pages proving compliance. Armed with evidence, I attended the monthly board meeting at the community center near the pool. About 15 residents sat in folding chairs, looking bored as the board discussed landscaping contracts and pool maintenance. That's where I first met Barbara Henderson, the HOA president. And my first impression was that she was nothing like Karen in personality or demeanor. Barbara was in her late 50s, wheat shoulder-length blonde hair that had natural-looking highlights and actually moved naturally when she turned her head. Unlike Karen's immobile helmet hair, she wore stylish, red-framed glasses that gave her an approachable, friendly appearance rather than severe, and a genuinely warm smile that actually reached her eyes and created small crinkles at the corners. She wore a red blazer over a simple white blouse, looking professional, but not stuffy or intimidating. And when I explained my situation during the homeowner comment period at the end of the meeting, she actually listened attentively, leaning forward and taking notes while maintaining direct eye contact. "You're absolutely right," Barbara said clearly, after carefully reviewing all my documentation, spreading my photographs across the table so the other 4 board members could examine them as well. "This violation notice was issued in error and should never have been sent. I'll have it removed from your file immediately. And of course, there will be no fine whatsoever. I sincerely apologize for any confusion and stress this has caused you. We strive for fairness here." Karen, who was sitting in the back row, as what she termed a concerned resident, rather than an official board member, stood up abruptly, her metal folding chair scraping loudly against the floor and drawing everyone's attention. "But Barbara, the mailbox clearly looks too tall from the street. It disrupts the uniform appearance that we've all worked so hard to maintain. Everyone driving past can see that it doesn't match the others on the block." "Karen," Barbara said patiently, and I got the distinct sense this wasn't their first disagreement by far. Not even close. The rules exist to give homeowners clear, objective guidelines, not to give us subjective reasons to find people who are in full compliance with those written standards. Sarah's mailbox measures 43 inches, which falls well within the specified range of 40 to 45 inches. The violation notice should never have been issued, period. Karen's lips pressed into a thin, tight line, her face flushing slightly pink, but she sat down without another word, though her body language radiated displeasure. The tension in the room was palpable and uncomfortable, and I noticed several other residents exchanging knowing glances, as if they'd witnessed similar confrontations before. As I left the meeting feeling somewhat relieved and vindicated, Karen followed me out to the parking lot, her tennis shoes making angry squeaking sounds against the pavement. "You think you're very clever," she said, her voice low and sharp, like a knife being slowly drawn from a leather sheath. "Getting Barbara on your side with your little photo presentation and documentation. But I know your type. I've seen it before. You people come into established neighborhoods and think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can just do whatever you want without consequences?" I stopped walking and turned to face her directly, my relief evaporating instantly into confusion and then growing concern. "You people, what exactly do you mean by that, Karen? What type am I supposed to be?" She blinked, seeming to realize suddenly how her words sounded to an outsider, her face flushing deeper. "I just mean, you know. New residents, young people who don't respect community standards and traditions. People who didn't grow up understanding how neighborhoods like this work and what's expected. But I'd heard that particular tone before, that specific emphasis on you people that carried implications beyond its literal meaning. I'm Chinese American, second generation. My parents having immigrated from Taiwan before I was born, and worked incredibly hard to build a good life. And while I wanted desperately to give her the benefit of the doubt, something in her emphasis and tone made my skin prickle with familiar, uncomfortably Over the next 6 months, the violations kept coming with disturbing regularity, sometimes 2 or 3 per month, always at unexpected times. My grass was allegedly too long, even though I'd mowed that morning and the clippings were still visible. I got cited for leaving garbage cans visible too long, though I'd brought them in promptly with timestamps proving it. Someone claimed my car was leaking oil and creating environmental hazards, but my mechanic confirmed it was in perfect mechanical condition with no leaks whatsoever. Every single violation had been reported by Karen. Barbara consistently sided with me after reviewing evidence, which only made Karen more determined and creative. "I don't understand what I've done to her," I told Barbara after the 6th false violation in as many months. We sat in her home office with family photos on the walls. I've tried being friendly and neighborly. I even brought her homemade cookies at a garage sale. Barbara sighed. "Karen has been like this with several residents. Between us, I think she's unhappy and takes it out controlling others. Her husband left 5 years ago, and she's been increasingly difficult." She leaned forward. "Document everything. If Karen's behavior crosses into actual harassment, we can take action. The board can restrict complaint abilities if filed in bad faith." I took her advice seriously. I kept detailed logs with photos and timestamps. When I mowed, I photographed it. When Kara left nasty notes on my windshield about my brother visiting, I documented those. I installed cameras. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was Thursday evening, late April. I'd finished a brutal 12-hour ICU shift. We'd lost a patient, sweet, elderly Mrs. Patterson. I was drained. When I pulled into my driveway at 7:32, something was wrong. My front door, painted colonial blue 2 days before from the approved palette, had a large notice taped to it. It was an official violation. It claimed unauthorized modifications and wrong color. The fine was $500, due immediately, with additional $250 weekly. I'd specifically gone to the HOA office, looked at the chart, had paint mixed to match colonial blue number 17. I had everything documented. I looked across the street. Karen stood at her window with binoculars. When our eyes met, she smiled. That smug, satisfied smile broke something in me. I marched across and knocked hard. She opened with that same smile. "Did you report my door?" I held up the notice. "The guidelines are specific," she said primly. "Your door is clearly wrong. It's the exact shade. Colonial blue 17. I have documentation. That's not how I see it. As a concerned resident, it's my duty. This is harassment, Karen." Her smile faded. "Harassment. I'm protecting property values. Unlike some people, I care about this community." What's that supposed to mean? It means some people don't belong in neighborhoods like this. Some people should stick to their own kind of areas. The words hung ugly and unmistakable. Before I could respond, she shut the door. I stood shaking. This wasn't about rules. This was racist. I drove immediately to Barbara's house. She answered in casual clothes, but her expression shifted seeing my face. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I told her everything. Barbara's expression grew serious. "Come in. We need to document this." We spent 2 hours at her dining table. Barbara took detailed notes. "This has gone too far. I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Karen's behavior is unacceptable. Will it help or make things worse?" Barbara looked serious. "I can't promise it won't get worse, but you have every right to feel safe in your home. As HOA president, it's my job to ensure that." I went home feeling relief and dread. I had no idea how right my dread would prove. Within 72 hours, I'd be standing in my driveway watching police lights, while Karen accused me of crimes I hadn't committed. The emergency board meeting took place the next evening at 6 o'clock in the community center. I arrived 15 minutes early, my stomach twisted in nervous knots, carrying a thick folder with all my documentation. Photos of my door, with the paint can showing Colonial Blue number 17. Hardware store receipts with the HOA color chart photographed from multiple angles. My 6-month log of Karen's harassment with dates, times, and evidence for each false accusation she'd made. Barbara was already there, setting up her laptop and organizing papers on the table at the front. She wore her red blazer, but her expression was serious, focused, almost grim. When she saw me, she gave a small, encouraging nod and gestured for me to sit in the front row. The other board members arrived shortly after. Tom Chun, the treasurer, a retired accountant in his 60s who always seemed fed. Maria Rodriguez, the secretary, a young mother of 3 who worked from home, and David Patterson, the newest board member, a lawyer who'd moved here 6 months ago. Karen arrived exactly at 6 o'clock, her face already flushed with what looked like preemptive anger. She wasn't alone. She'd brought 3 other residents with her, all women in their 50s or 60s who are recognized as her friends from the neighborhood. They clustered together in the back row, whispering among themselves and shooting hostile looks in my direction. One of them, a woman named Patricia, who lived 2 streets over, actually glared at me with open contempt, as if I were personally offending her by existing. Barbara called a meeting to order at 6:05, her voice firm and professional. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We're here tonight to address a serious matter involving resident harassment and discriminatory behavior. Sarah Chun has filed a formal complaint against Karen Whitmore regarding a pattern of false HOA violations and inappropriate comments. Sarah, would you please present your case?" I stood up on shaky legs and walked to the front of the room, acutely aware of Karen's eyes boring into my back. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything methodically and calmly, though my hands trembled slightly as I passed around copies of my documentation to each board member. The 6 false violations over 6 months. Each one reported by Karen, each one dismissed by the board after thorough investigation. The notes she'd left on my car windshield, the way she watched me constantly with binoculars from her window, and finally, her comments 2 nights ago, the clear implication that I didn't belong in this neighborhood because of my ethnicity, because of the color of my skin. She specifically said to me, and I quote this exactly, "Some people don't belong in neighborhoods like this. Some people should stick to their own kind of areas," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion churning in my gut like acid. The implication was absolutely unmistakable and clear. This isn't about HOA rules or protecting property values. This is about her not wanting someone who looks like me, someone of Asian descent, living across the street from her. This is racial discrimination, plain and simple. The room went silent for a long, heavy moment. Tom Chun was frowning deeply, his fingers steepled under his chin as he processed everything. Maria Rodriguez looked visibly upset, her eyes wide with shock and her hand covering her mouth. David Patterson was taking notes rapidly, his lawyer's mind clearly processing everything I'd said and its legal implications. Barbara's jaw was tight, her hands clasped firmly on the table in front of her, knuckles white with tension. Karen stood up abruptly, her metal chair scraping loudly against the floor in the quiet room, drawing everyone's attention. "This is absolutely ridiculous," I never said anything racist. Sarah is deliberately twisting my words because she doesn't want to follow the rules like everyone else has to. She's playing the race card to avoid accountability for her violations. This is outrageous. Karen, please sit down, Barbara said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of authority. You'll have your chance to respond properly. Sarah, do you have anything else to add to your statement? I shook my head and returned to my seat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. Karen, you may present your side now, Barbara said evenly, though her tone suggested she wasn't expecting much that would change the situation. Karen remained standing and launched into a 15-minute tirade that became increasingly unhinged and circular as it went on. She insisted that every single violation she'd reported was completely legitimate, and that the board was simply far too lenient in dismissing them without proper consideration. She claimed I was deliberately trying to lower property values with my choices and disrespect for community standards. She accused Barbara of showing clear favoritism and bias toward me specifically, suggesting some kind of conspiracy. And as for my comments, Karen said, her voice rising to nearly a shout that echoed in the small room, I simply meant that new residents need to respect established community standards. That's all I meant. If Sarah chooses to interpret that as something racial, that's her problem and her issue, not mine. I have friends of all backgrounds and ethnicities. I'm not a racist. How dare she accuse me of that? The classic defense of someone who'd absolutely said something racist and knew it perfectly well. Her friends in the back row nodded vigorously in agreement, though they were the only ones in the room doing so. David Patterson spoke up for the first time, his voice calm and measured in stark contrast to Karen's shouting. Karen, I've carefully reviewed all the documentation that Sarah provided to the board. 6 separate violation reports over a period of 6 months, all filed by you personally, all found to be completely without merit after thorough investigation by board members. That's not a pattern of legitimate community concern. That's a clear pattern of targeted harassment. Can you explain to us why you continued to file these reports even after being told repeatedly and explicitly that Sarah was in full compliance with all HOA regulations? Karen's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish gasping for air, clearly not expecting to be challenged so directly. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. Someone has to maintain proper standards. If the board won't enforce the rules properly and thoroughly, then concerned residents have to step up and take action. But the rules were being enforced properly. Tom Chun interjected quietly but firmly. Sarah was in complete compliance with every single regulation. The only person not following proper procedures was you, Karen. You've wasted significant board time and community resources with frivolous complaints. That has to stop immediately. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Karen becoming increasingly defensive and her arguments becoming increasingly circular and nonsensical. Finally, Barbara called for a formal vote on corrective action. The motion was to issue Karen an official written warning for harassment, restrict her ability to file violation reports for a period of 6 months unless pre-approved by a board member, and require her to attend professionally facilitated mediation with me through a neutral third party. The vote was 4-0 in favor, with Karen obviously not voting on her own sanction. The decision was unanimous among all board members. Karen stood up, physically shaking with barely controlled rage, and pointed directly at me with a trembling finger. This isn't over. You think you've won, but you haven't. I know people in this community. I have connections you can't even imagine. You'll regret moving to this neighborhood. I absolutely promise you that. The threat was clear and unmistakable. She stormed out of the room, her friends hurrying after her while shooting dirty looks back at both the board and me. After they left the room in a huff, Barbara let out a long, exhausted breath and removed her red glasses to rub her tired eyes with both hands. I'm so sorry you've had to deal with this situation, Sarah. Karen's behavior was completely and utterly unacceptable. We'll be monitoring the situation very closely going forward, and if there are any further incidents, we'll take even stronger action. I thanked each of the board members individually for their support and left feeling a strange, unsettling mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that I'd been heard and believed. Apprehension because of Karen's parting threat and the genuine danger I'd seen in her eyes when she made it. I was right to be worried. The next morning, Friday, I woke up early and walked outside to find that someone had spray-painted the word "leave" in large, angry red letters across my white garage door overnight while I slept. My security camera had mysteriously stopped working at exactly 11:43 the previous night. The power cable cleanly and deliberately cut. I filed an immediate police report, and Officer Martinez came out to take photos from multiple angles and collect a detailed statement. He was sympathetic, but brutally honest about the likelihood of actually catching whoever did this vandalism, without any camera footage or witnesses. It's going to be really tough to prove who did this, he admitted honestly, snapping photos of the vandalism with his department-issued camera. Do you have any solid idea who might have done this to your property? I told him everything about the board meeting, about Karen's explicit threat that I'd regret moving here, about the 6 months of systematic harassment. He wrote everything down carefully and methodically in his official notebook. I spent Friday arranging spray paint removal, which cost $375. I called Barbara, who was horrified. This is criminal vandalism. Keep me updated. Saturday, I had a new security system installed with 4 cameras, motion lights, and backup battery. Installation cost $1,200 I couldn't really afford. Sunday afternoon, I heard shouting outside. Karen was in her driveway, gesturing wildly on her phone. Even from across the street, she was clearly furious. The conversation lasted 10 minutes before she slammed back inside, her face purple with rage. That evening, I was on my porch reading when Karen marched across the street toward me. My heart pounded. I stood up near my door. She stopped at the bottom of my steps, arms crossed. I know it was you, she hissed. What? I asked, confused. I know you called the county inspector on me. Don't play dumb. The inspector cited me for unpermitted deck work yesterday. That was you. You're retaliating. Liar, you're getting back at me for the board meeting. But 2 can play that game. You think spray paint was bad? You have no idea what I'm capable of. My blood ran cold at the clear admission. You're admitting you vandalized my property? She blinked, realizing what she'd said, but her face hardened. I didn't say that. You can't prove anything, but stay out of my business, or you'll regret it. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, she sneered. They won't do anything. You're nobody. You don't belong here. Your kind never knows when they're not wanted. She walked back to her house. I did call the police. Officer Martinez came and I told him everything. He took a report but warned the admission was too vague to prove anything concrete. It's technically an admission, but a defense lawyer would tear it apart in court, he explained, his expression sympathetic. But this does establish a pattern of escalating behavior. Keep documenting everything, every interaction, every incident. The more evidence you have, the stronger any eventual case will be. That night, I barely slept, startling awake at every small sound and checking my new security cameras obsessively on my phone. I felt like I was under siege in my own home, and I hated it. I hated feeling afraid. I hated that Karen had this much power over my peace of mind. Monday morning, I dragged myself to work exhausted but determined. I loved being a nurse, and refused to let Karen take that away. I made it through my shift on autopilot, my mind churning with worry. Every camera notification made my heart race until I checked and saw it was just a neighbor or delivery truck. I got home at 7:30 Monday evening. Relieved, nothing seemed wrong. My house looked normal. No vandalism, no Karen lurking. Maybe she'd decided to back off after the police visit. Maybe the threat of involvement had scared her. I should have known better. Someone like Karen, who'd spent 6 months obsessively harassing me, wasn't going to give up. Tuesday evening, everything exploded. I'd just gotten home from another long shift, changed into comfortable clothes, and was heating leftover Chinese food when I heard sirens approaching. At first, I didn't think anything of it. We were 2 miles from the hospital, and ambulances passed regularly. But these sirens were getting closer. They stopped right in front of my house. I opened my front door, heart sinking. A police cruiser sat in my driveway, lights painting everything red and blue. Officer Martinez stepped out, hand on his belt, expression serious. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, wearing that satisfied smirk. "That's her, officer," Karen called loudly, so all neighbors would hear. "The one breaking every rule and threatening me. She threatened to burn down my house yesterday. I have witnesses. She's dangerous." I stood frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. Threatened to burn her house. I'd done no such thing. I hadn't spoken to her since Sunday when she admitted to vandalism. Officer Martinez walked up my driveway. I could see recognition and sympathy in his eyes. He'd taken both my reports, but he still had to investigate. "Señora Chun," he said formally, "I need to ask you some questions about an allegation." I looked past him at Karen, practically vibrating with glee, and understood everything. This was her retaliation. Her punishment for the board meeting, for standing up to her, for existing in what she considered her neighborhood. She was trying to get me arrested, to make me look like the problem. Even though Officer Martinez clearly didn't believe her, he had to investigate. She'd weaponized the police against me. "Officer Martinez," I said, voice shaking, "she's lying. I never threatened her. I haven't spoken to her since Sunday, and that conversation was on my porch, where my cameras recorded everything. I can show you the footage now." Karen's smirk faltered at the mention of cameras, but quickly recovered. "The cameras are fake. She's covering up her threats." Several neighbors had come out, drawn by the lights, and Karen's shouting. They watched me like I was a criminal, whispering and pointing. This was exactly what Karen wanted. Maximum humiliation. Maximum damage to my reputation. Even if charges didn't stick, even if I proved my innocence, suspicion would linger forever. The Chinese nurse who the police investigated for making threats, the troublemaker who caused drama, she'd won in the court of public opinion, and we both knew it. That smirk said it all. "Officer Martinez," I said again, my voice shaking but determined to prove my innocence. "I can prove beyond any doubt that I never threatened her. My security cameras have been recording everything continuously since Saturday when I had the new system installed. The conversation she's talking about, it never happened. I haven't even been outside my house except to go to work since Sunday evening, and that specific interaction is recorded on my cameras. She's deliberately lying to weaponize you against me because she knows she's in trouble for the vandalism and harassment." Officer Martinez nodded slowly, his expression remaining professional, but with a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "Can you show me the footage now, Ms. Chun? I need to review it as part of my investigation." "Of course. Come inside." I led him into my house, acutely aware of all the neighbors still watching from their porches and driveways like vultures circling, their phones out, recording everything, like this was some kind of entertainment for them, rather than a serious situation. Karen remained on her porch, arms still crossed defiantly, though her smirk had faded slightly. She was clearly banking on the assumption that I was bluffing about the cameras, that I wouldn't actually have footage to disprove her claims. Inside my living room, I pulled up my security camera app on my laptop, my hands trembling slightly as I navigated through the organized files. "Here," I said, pulling up Sunday evening's footage and setting it to play from the beginning. "This is the last time I spoke to her. You can see the entire conversation from start to finish. She came to my porch around 6:30, accused me of calling a county inspector on her about unpermitted deck work, admitted to the vandalism on my garage, and threatened me repeatedly. I never threatened her. Not once during this entire interaction." We watched the footage together in complete silence. The audio was crystal clear, thanks to the high-quality system I'd invested in after the first vandalism incident. Every single word Karen had said was captured perfectly with timestamp and metadata. Her admission about the spray paint being retaliation for the board meeting, her explicit threat that I had no idea what she was capable of doing to me, her racist comment about my kind not knowing when we're not wanted in neighborhoods like this. Officer Martinez watched the entire 5-minute interaction without saying a single word, methodically taking detailed notes in his official notebook the entire time. "And since then?" he asked when the video ended, looking up from his notes. Have you had any contact with her at all since Sunday evening? None whatsoever. Primera Saeed firmly pulling up additional footage. I've been at work Monday and Tuesday until 7:30 both evenings. I came straight home both days, went inside immediately, and stayed inside for the rest of the evening. I can show you the camera footage from both complete days. At no point did I go over to her house, approach her property, or threaten her in any way, shape, or form. She's completely fabricating this entire story out of thin air. I pulled up Monday and Tuesday's footage systematically, fast-forwarding through both days while Officer Martinez watched carefully. The camera showed me leaving for work in the morning in my scrubs, coming home in the evening still in my scrubs, and absolutely nothing else of significance. No interaction with Karen whatsoever. No leaving my property to confront her. No shouting across the street. Nothing that could possibly be construed as threatening behavior under any interpretation. Officer Martinez watched it all attentively, nodding slowly as he continued taking careful notes in his methodical handwriting. "Ms. Chun," he said, finally after reviewing all the footage thoroughly, closing his notebook and looking at me directly with a serious expression, "this is clearly and unambiguously a false report. The footage conclusively proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that you made no threats whatsoever to Ms. Whitmore. In fact, it clearly shows Ms. Whitmore threatening you explicitly and admitting to criminal vandalism of your property. I'm going to include all of this evidence in my official report. You might want to seriously consider filing for a restraining order against her, given the escalating pattern of harassment we've documented and her admission on camera to criminal activity." Relief flooded through me so intensely I actually felt lightheaded for a moment. Can you tell her and all those neighbors out there who are still watching that I didn't do anything wrong, that's Elliot?" Officer Martinez gave me a small, understanding smile that softened his professional demeanor. "I can, and I absolutely will. Would you be willing to provide copies of these videos for my official police report and potential future proceedings?" "Absolutely. I'll email them to you right now." "What's your department email address?" After I sent the files securely through email, we walked back outside together into the warm evening air. Karen was still standing on her porch, but now she looked distinctly uncertain, shifting her weight from foot to foot, nervously like someone who suddenly realized their plan had backfired spectacularly. The neighbors were still watching and recording with their phones, clearly hoping for more drama. Officer Martinez walked across the street toward Karen with purposeful strides, and I followed at a respectful distance, wanting desperately to hear what he said to her. I needed this vindication to be as public as her false accusation had been. Karen's face went purple. "Those videos are fake. She doctored them. The videos have timestamps and metadata, verifying authenticity," Martinez said firmly. "They're not altered. I'm advising you to cease all contact with Ms. Chun. Any further harassment will result in criminal charges. Understand? This is ridiculous. I'm the victim. I'm calling the police chief. I know the mayor." Martinez remained calm. "You're welcome to contact anyone, ma'am. My report will reflect the evidence. Good evening." He drove away, the red and blue lights finally stopping their nauseating rotation. The neighbors slowly dispersed, many of them casting curious and confused glances at both me and Karen, clearly uncertain about what they'd just witnessed. I heard whispered conversations starting up, saw people checking their phones, as if looking up what filing a false police report meant. Karen stood on her porch, physically shaking with barely controlled rage, glaring at me with such pure, undiluted hatred that I actually took an involuntary step backward toward my front door. I went inside and immediately locked my door, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline coursing through my system. I called Barbara immediately to tell her what had just happened, needing to process it with someone who understood. She answered on the second ring, sounding concerned. "Sarah, I saw the police lights from my window earlier." "What?" "Upend, is everything okay?" I explained everything in detail. Karen's false report claiming I'd threatened to burn down her house, the police investigation, the security camera footage that proved my complete innocence, Officer Martinez telling Karen publicly that she'd filed a false report and could face criminal charges. Oh my God. Barbara breathed on the other end of the line, her voice filled with shock and disbelief. She actually filed a false police report. That's a serious crime, Sarah. She could face criminal charges for that on top of everything else. You absolutely need to get a restraining order as soon as possible. This woman is not stable, and she's clearly escalating beyond anything I've seen before. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening. We need to take much stronger action than we initially planned. This has gone way past simple HOA violations and neighbor disputes. What kind of stronger action? I asked, hoping desperately for something concrete that would finally make this nightmare end. The board has the legal authority to fine homeowners for serious violations of community peace and safety, Barbara explained, her voice taking on a determined edge that I hadn't heard before. We can also pursue legal action to force her to sell her home if her behavior constitutes a clear and ongoing threat to other residents. It's rarely used, and it requires extensive documentation and a unanimous board vote. But I think we have more than enough evidence now, especially with an official police report showing she filed false criminal charges and admitted on video to vandalism. That night I barely slept once again, my mind racing anxiously through everything that had happened over the past week. Every small sound outside made me jolt awake in bed, convinced Karen was out there doing something else to my property in retaliation. I checked my security cameras obsessively on my phone every 15 to 20 minutes throughout the night, watching for any sign of suspicious movement near my house. At 3 in the morning, I saw a car drive slowly past my house and my heart started racing until I realized it was just someone doing a late-night food delivery to a neighbor 3 doors down. Wednesday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in over 2 years. I just couldn't face a 12-hour shift in the ICU when I'd barely slept and was jumping at every shadow and sound. My supervisor was understanding when I briefly explained I was dealing with a serious harassment situation and had police actively involved. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," she said kindly with genuine concern. "We'll cover your shift today. Just let us know when you're ready to come back to work." I spent the entire day methodically documenting everything that had happened in excruciating detail. I printed out every single email exchange with Barbara over the past 6 months. I compiled all my security camera footage into one organized folder with clear labels, timestamps, and descriptions. I wrote out a detailed timeline of every single incident over the past 6 months, with exact dates, precise times, potential witnesses, and physical evidence for each one. I printed out copies of all the police reports Officer Martinez had filed. By the time I finished, late in the afternoon, I had assembled a 3-inch thick binder that told the complete, comprehensive story of Karen's systematic harassment campaign against me. The emergency meeting was at 7. At 6:45, I walked over with my binder. Barbara was there with Tom, Maria, and David. They looked serious. "Sarah," Barbara said, hugging me briefly. "We're going to fix this, I promise." At 7, Karen walked in with a lawyer, a stern man in an expensive suit. "This is my attorney, Mr. Richard Foster," Karen announced. "I'm taking legal action against Sarah June and this HOA for defamation, harassment, and violation of my rights. Last night was a setup." "I have witnesses." David raised his hand. "Mr. Foster, I'm also an attorney. Before your client continues, you should know there's substantial evidence of her harassment, vandalism, and false police reports. I'd advise you to speak with her privately first." "What evidence?" Barbara slid a folder toward him. "Security footage showing your client admitting to vandalism and threats. Police reports. 6 months of frivolous complaints. Witness statements. Review these before continuing." Foster read, his expression growing serious. He whispered urgently to Karen. They had a heated, whispered conversation. "I need to consult with my client privately," Foster finally said. "We filed a..." In the hallway, Tom whizzed. That lawyer just realized his client lied to him. After 15 minutes, Foster opened the door. Karen looked like she'd been crying, eyes red, makeup smudged, but her jaw was set stubbornly. After reviewing the documentation, Foster said carefully, "My client wishes to address the board." Ms. Karen stood, gripping the table. "I may have overreacted to some situations. The stress of living alone, has been difficult. I recognize my behavior may have been inappropriate. I'm willing to apologize and attend mediation. It was the most insincere apology ever. Her voice was flat, eyes hard, couldn't look at me. Barbara nodded. Thank you, Karen. However, given the severity, we need additional measures. The board is voting tonight on a $5,000 fine for violations of community peace, requiring anger management, counseling, and 1-year probation. Any further incidents will result in proceedings to force the sale of your property. Karen gasped. $5,000. You can't do that. Foster put a hand on her arm. The board has the authority. Given the documented pattern and legal implications, I'd advise accepting these terms rather than facing criminal charges and civil litigation. The vote was unanimous. 4-0. Barbara handed Karen formal, written notice. 30 days to pay the fine, 60 days to enroll in counseling, and any violation of no contact would result in immediate proceedings to force her home sale. As Karen and her lawyer left, she turned back to look at me one last time. The hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. Even with all these sanctions, she still couldn't let go. I realized this probably wasn't over. Barbara turned to me. Sarah, get that restraining order. Even with these sanctions, I don't trust she's done. She looked unhinged. Promise me you'll go to the courthouse tomorrow. I promise, I said. Thursday morning, I filed for a restraining order at the courthouse. The clerk was sympathetic. This should be approved quickly. You'll likely have a temporary order within 48 hours, with a hearing for the permanent order in 2 weeks. I went back to work that afternoon, determined to reclaim normalcy. Friday afternoon, the courthouse called. The judge approved my temporary restraining order. Karen had 48 hours to stay 100 yards from me, my home, and workplace. She'd be served that evening. The permanent hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from Monday. I felt relief wash over me. Legal protection. Finally, I drove home singing along to the radio for the first time in weeks. Maybe this nightmare was ending. Maybe I could relax in my own home. As I pulled onto my street, I saw Barbara in her driveway. I pulled over to tell her the good news. "That's wonderful, Sarah," she said, genuinely smiling. The sheriff should be serving her now, actually. I saw their car pull up about 10 minutes ago. We chatted about how relieved I felt. Then Barbara's expression changed, smile fading as she looked past me. "Oh no," she whispered. "Sarah, don't turn around. Just get in your car and drive to my house." Now? But I turned around. Karen stood in her driveway, restraining order papers in one hand, pointing at me with the other. Even from 50 yards, her face was twisted with fury. She started walking toward me, determined, angry. The deputy tried to stop her, but she ignored him. She kept coming, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was far from over. "Cut in. Stop," the sheriff's deputy called urgently, hand moving toward his belt. "You've been served with a restraining order. You need to maintain 100 yards. If you continue, I'll arrest you." But Karen didn't stop. She kept walking toward me. The restraining order crumpled in her fist, face twisted with rage. "This is your fault," she screamed. "Everything was fine until you moved here. You've ruined my life. You've turned everyone against me. I'm going to make you pay." Barbara grabbed my arm urgently. "Sarah, get in your car now and drive away. Don't engage with her." I fumbled for my car keys with shaking hands, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I managed to unlock my car and dove into the driver's seat just as the deputy reached Karen and grabbed her arm to stop her forward momentum. She tried to wrench free violently, still screaming incoherently at me, her eyes wild and completely unfocused, like someone who'd lost touch with reality. "Ma'am, you need to stop resisting right now," the deputy commanded firmly, struggling to restrain her as she fought against his grip with surprising strength. "You're violating a restraining order, and I'm placing you under arrest for that violation. A second sheriff's car pulled up quickly with lights and sirens blaring loudly, and another deputy jumped out to assist his colleague. Together, they managed to handcuff Karen, while she continued screaming threats and wild accusations at me. I sat frozen in my car, watching the surreal scene unfold like something from a nightmare, unable to fully process that this was actually happening in my quiet suburban neighborhood. They put Karen in the back of the patrol car, still screaming, though I could no longer make out the words through the closed windows. The first deputy walked over to my car window, and I rolled it down with trembling fingers. "Miss Chun, are you all right? Did she make any physical contact with you at any point during that confrontation?" "No," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't reach me." "You stopped her in time. Thank you so much. We're taking her to the county jail for violating the restraining order," he explained, his expression sympathetic and professional. "She'll be held overnight at minimum, possibly longer depending on what the judge decides at her arraignment hearing tomorrow morning. You should be safe tonight, but I'd strongly recommend staying somewhere else if possible, just to be extra cautious. Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" I nodded mutely, not trusting my voice to remain steady. Barbara appeared at my window, her hand on my shoulder. "She's staying with me tonight," she said firmly and protectively. "I'm not letting her go home alone after this incident." I ended up spending that night, and the next 2 nights, at Barbara's comfortable house, sleeping in a guest room while she and her husband Robert made sure I felt safe and supported throughout the ordeal. They were incredibly kind and thoughtful, making me meals I could barely eat and sitting with me for hours while I processed everything that had happened. Barbara called the other board members and explained the situation in detail, and they all agreed unanimously that Karen's behavior had crossed every possible line, and emergency measures would absolutely be taken. On Saturday morning, I attended Karen's arraignment hearing via video call that Barbara helped me set up on her computer. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, named Judge Patricia Morris, reviewed the case with clear disapproval etched deeply on her face. Karen sat at the defendant's table with a court-appointed public defender since Mr. Foster had apparently dropped her as a client after reviewing the evidence. She looked absolutely terrible, disheveled and exhausted, her eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. All the fight and anger seemed to have completely drained out of her overnight in jail. "Senora Whitmore," Judge Morrison said, her voice cold and authoritative, "you were served with a temporary restraining order at approximately 6:15 on Friday evening. Less than 5 minutes later, you deliberately and blatantly violated that order by approaching Ms. Chun while making explicit threats against her person. The sheriff deputy's detailed report states you had to be physically restrained and arrested on the scene. This is one of the most blatant and egregious violations of a protective order I've personally seen in my 20 years on the bench. I'm setting bail at $10,000 and making the restraining order permanent, effective immediately, with increased distance. You are not to go within 200 yards of Ms. Chun, her home, her workplace, or any location she is known to frequent. Any further violations will result in significant jail time. Do you understand these terms clearly?" "Yes, Your Honor," Karen whispered, her voice barely audible through the video connection, sounding broken and defeated. The judge also ordered her to continue with the mandated anger management counseling sessions and added mandatory mental health evaluation and ongoing treatment to her conditions. Karen's sister posted the bail money later that day, but according to Barbara, who had extensive connections throughout the neighborhood, Karen immediately went to stay with family in another state and put her house on the market within 48 hours of her release. On Monday evening, the HOA board held one final meeting specifically about Karen's case. All 5 board members were present, along with the HOA's attorney, a sharp and experienced woman named Linda Chun, who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I attended with my massive 3-inch thick binder of documentation, though it turned out to be almost unnecessary given everything that had happened over the weekend. The attorney reviewed all the accumulated evidence methodically, the police reports, the video footage, the restraining order violation, Karen's arrest record, everything. The HOA has more than sufficient legal grounds to pursue forced sale of the property, Linda Chun stated, reviewing her detailed notes. However, Given that Ms. Whitmore has already voluntarily listed the house for sale and permanently relocated out of state, and given that pursuing forced sale proceedings would be costly and time-consuming for the association with uncertain timeline, I recommend we accept her voluntary sale with the strict condition that the $5,000 fine be paid directly from the sale proceeds before closing. We should also legally require that she'll not be physically present at any time during showings or the closing process. The board voted unanimously to accept this recommendation without hesitation. Barbara smiled warmly at me across the table, and I felt an enormous weight I'd been carrying for 6 long months finally begin to lift from my shoulders. It was really, truly over. Karen was gone from my life. I could finally live in my home in peace without fear. "Sarah," Barbara said warmly after the meeting concluded, "I want to personally apologize on behalf of the entire board for not taking stronger action sooner in this situation. We should have recognized the severity and escalating nature earlier. You shouldn't have had to endure months of harassment before we took truly decisive steps. It's not your fault at all." I said honestly, meaning every single word. You took appropriate action as soon as you had sufficient evidence to support it. You were fair to both of us until it became absolutely undeniable what was really happening. I don't blame the board at all for how things unfolded. I blame Karen for choosing to be hateful and vindictive instead of just being a decent human being. Neighbor. Barbara pulled me into a tight, warm hug that felt genuinely maternal. You're a remarkably strong woman, Sarah. Stronger than most people would be in your situation. I'm truly honored to have you as both a neighbor and a friend. Over the next month, my life slowly but steadily returned to something resembling normalcy. I went back to work at the hospital full-time, though my coworkers noticed immediately that I was more jumpy and hypervigilant than before the ordeal. My therapist, whom I'd started seeing weekly, called it hypervigilance, resulting from prolonged stress and harassment, essentially a trauma response. She assured me it would gradually fade with time and continued therapy. I kept my security cameras running continuously, still checking them periodically out of deeply ingrained habit, though thankfully the only thing they captured now was the peaceful, boring routine of normal suburban life. Karen's house sold remarkably quickly, within just 3 weeks, to a lovely young couple with adorable twin toddlers. Their names were Marcus and Jennifer Thompson, and they were exactly the kind of neighbors I'd always hoped to have when I first moved here. Friendly, genuinely respectful, and wonderfully normal. Jennifer brought over a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies as a welcome gift when they moved in, and I actually teared up at the simple, genuine kindness of the gesture after everything I'd been through. It was such a stark contrast to Karen's fake welcome with her clipboard. "We heard there was some trouble with the previous owner," Marcus said carefully when they came over for coffee one Saturday morning, about a week after moving in. "We wanted you to know right away that we're absolutely not like that at all. We believe everyone deserves to feel safe and welcome in their own neighborhood, regardless of who they are or where they come from." I told them an abbreviated version of what had happened, and they were appropriately shocked and sympathetic. "That's horrible." Jennifer sighed, shaking her head in genuine disbelief. "We can't imagine treating someone that way. Please know if you ever need anything. We're right across the street and happy to help." We became good friendly neighbors, the way it should be. The $5,000 fine came from Karen's sale proceeds, as ordered. The money upgraded the community pool, which felt like poetic justice. 6 months later, I repainted my front door, the same colonial blue number 17. This was my house, my home, my choice. No one would make me feel unwelcome again. Barbara came over and raised her lemonade. "To freedom and good neighbors." "To freedom and good neighbors?" I echoed. A year later, the board asked me to join. I accepted, seeing it as ensuring what happened to me would never happen to anyone else. During my first board meeting, we reviewed a complaint about elaborate decorations. I listened carefully. The decorations met all guidelines. I voted to dismiss. "We enforce rules, not personal preferences," Premeta Saeed firmly. "If decorations meet guidelines, they're acceptable." Barbara beamed and nodded. After the meeting, she pulled me aside. "You're going to be excellent, Sarah. You bring perspective we desperately need. Thank you for believing in me and standing up for me when I needed it most. 2 years later, a young Asian couple approached me at the pool. Are you Sarah, Chun? We're thinking about buying here. Is this neighborhood welcoming to Asian families? My heart ached. I told him my story honestly. The harassment, the vandalism, the police, but also about Barbara. The board standing up. The community doing the right thing. There are bigots everywhere, I said. But what matters is how the community responds. This HOA investigated thoroughly and took strong action. We have anti-discrimination policies now. You'd be welcome. They bought a house 2 streets over. That conversation made me realize my nightmare had led to positive changes. The board implemented new harassment policies, mandatory discrimination training, and clearer conflict procedures. My suffering had made things better for others. 3 years after Karen left, I could think about it without my heart racing. I'd learned I was stronger than imagined. That standing up matters. That documentation is powerful. That good people will stand with you. On the 3-year anniversary, I threw a gathering at my house. Barbara and Robert, the Thompsons, board members, neighbors who'd become friends. We sat on my patio and celebrated community. Done right. Barbara raised her glass. To Sarah, who showed us courage and resilience. To Riverside Meadows, which learned to be better. To the future, which is bright because we choose to make it so. Everyone cheered. I felt genuine happiness. I'd found my place, fought for it, earned it, and could finally enjoy it without fear. As guests mingled, I stood watching, taking it in. This was what I'd wanted 3 years ago. Community, belonging, home. It had taken a nightmare to get here, but I'd made it. My phone buzzed. My brother asking how I was. I smiled and typed back. I'm home. I'm happy. I'm exactly where I belong. The drama was now just a story, a closed chapter. Karen was somewhere else, hopefully getting help. I didn't hate her anymore. I'd moved past that. She didn't deserve space in my mind. What I think about is the community I helped build, the policies I helped create, the people I helped welcome, every new resident, especially minorities. I introduce myself and let them know they have an ally. They need to know this is safe. They belong. Someone will stand up for them. That's the real ending. Not police lights and restraining orders, though those happened. The real ending is quieter. It's me on my porch Sunday morning, waving 2 neighbors. Serving on the board fairly. My colonial blue door I chose myself. Belonging. Finally and completely. In the place I call home. And if you're reading this because you're going through something similar, because you have a Karen in your life making you feel unwelcome or unsafe in your own home, I want you to know this. Document everything. Stand up for yourself. Find your Barbara. That person or people who will believe you and support you. Don't give up. Don't let them win. Because you deserve to feel safe and happy where you live. You deserve to belong. And no one has the right to take that away from you, no matter how long they've lived there or how many rules they claim to know. The day the police called on me was one of the worst days of my life, but it also marked the beginning of the end of my nightmare. It forced everything into the open where it couldn't be ignored anymore. It created the evidence that finally made people listen and take action. Sometimes the darkest moments lead to the dawn. Sometimes you have to go through the fire to get to the other side. I went through it. Primera survived it, and I came out stronger. You can too.